In class 6, we're going to shape the mix. And as I said in the preview or the overview, this is the place where you really get the most creative, right? This is where you make all the fun decisions about what's working and what's not working, what you want to feature, and preparing to kind of weave the mix together, which is really the automation process. So at this point, you need to revisit your levels. And I'm going to show you a bunch of really neat tricks for kind of really assessing your mix. It's very easy at this stage, when you've done all the work up to this point, to lose your perspective on it, right? To lose your freshness with it, because you get used to hearing it a certain way. And it's not until 3 weeks later when you listen to the mix and you say, God, how come the snare drum is 10 times louder than everything else in the mix? And there are ways and tools and methods that you can use in this process here that help you to kind of find those proper balances, to keep things in balance with each other. So those balances are levels and panning between the different instruments, the tonal balances, so certain instruments don't take over the whole mix unless they're meant to, right? Maybe you want a piano to be really featured and huge and all the other instrumentation sounds off in the distance. Fine, that's the approach and that's what you go for, right? And so you shape things accordingly. Right? So this is where you start playing, you start adjusting the effects. This reverb is too long. I'm going to tighten up this reverb. I'm going to change this reverb from a hall to, a plate program. I'm going to change, I'm going to take the reverb off of the guitar so they kind of pull out of the speakers a little bit more forward and leave a little bit more of the reverb on the acoustics so that I can create a little bit more separation between the instruments. Right? And this is where you start to play with things and adjust the equalization, right? Adjust the compression, right? Make some other decisions, add some other forms of processing in line here, right? We'll get into this is a great place for adding in low level compression, which brings up more presence in instruments that aren't quite sticking out and aren't as focused as the way you want them. And you make adjustments to a lot of the things so that the mix starts to come to life, right? This is the part where you're really starting to, where you apply the electrical current, right? And you bring young Frankenstein to life, right? And then you scream, into the night with the thunder and the rain and the full moon and whatever. Anyway, going back in time there to a great movie. This is where you really kind of make things come alive, right? This is where the mix should start to really groove and feel good. So your adjustments are more tweaks. This is not about, okay, let's, tear down all the EQ and start over again, right? And maybe you get to that point in the mix, right, where if nothing is working, maybe you want to start over again. But usually at this point, you've done like a certain amount of things, and now you're trying to get it to feel good. Now you're trying to get the instruments more in balance, so there's the interplay that you're really looking for. And that's the type of thing that you get when a great live performance. You have a band, right? And they work really well together. They respond to each other, right? They are, connected in terms of how they push and pull their notes, the individual, how long they sustain individual notes and all these things that, how much they push certain phrases, right? How loud do they solo? Or when they start to go down in solo, does all the other musicians follow them? These are the things that kind of you're bringing out, right? So you want to get all of that detail and bring the aliveness into the track so it feels good. So I don't even really dig into automation until I get to a place where everything feels good, but the guitars are a little bit too loud here, and this is a little bit too low there. And I realize it's like, okay, everything is really, really feeling cool, but now I need to start weaving the instruments into each other. And that's when you're ready. But it has to feel good. At that point, like when you start listening to the mix, it's like you should be pumping your head, right? You should be moving your foot. You should be really into it. It should feel really great, right? It should be alive in the speakers and in the headphones when you're listening to it. So this is a really, really critical phase. This is like a difficult one to teach because it's conceptual in a lot of ways, even though less technical, and we'll go back to the technical and we'll look at it and I'll talk about why I'm going to apply like this effect or change this effect and how I'm going to get this to work together. And then you'll start to hear it, right? These things happen all throughout the process, but when you start off working with equalization and compression and effects, and it's like you start working with the individual instruments, what happens is that you get the drums and bass sounding really good together, but then when you add in the guitars, you lose a lot of what you got with the bass. So now you adjust the guitars, and you're going to have to go back and adjust some of the drums and the bass sounds to help complement the guitars to make them work together. And then you add in the keyboards, and then that's going to affect to some degree the bass and the drums and the guitars, and then you have to keep adjusting. And so it's this kind of back and forth as you add in instruments. You're changing levels, you're making panning adjustments, you're reshaping things. You can't be as warm with this guitar sound because it muddies up the piano, blah blah blah. And then you kind of go on, and then you get it to a place where everything really works together, has its own space, and feels good, right? And then you're ready to kind of move on to the next stage of the mixing.